Thank you so much, panelist. Wonderful discussion. As you were talking about the, anti-gender movement, anti-rights movement. Yeah. If I speak, in perspective of Bangladesh, I don't know how I will explain. We have started, as you know, Bandhu is an organization that started in 1996. So after 26, 27 years of intervention movement, I don't know in which direction we are now moving ahead. We are nowhere in the country. Every day receiving death, every day receiving, organization, shut down. Then, the LGBTI population, disappear from the country. So this is happening. My question is, yes, we discussed about, sort of challenges, how it is damaging, individual organizations. But the point is, as an activist, as an organization, collectively, how can, what steps can be taken? I think that is important. That needs to be, come out. So in Bangladesh, the Transgender Protection Act, the problem has started from there. Once we have started issues around incorporating, sort of comprehensive education section in the textbook board. So problem has started from there. So now the issues is that there is a resistance to accept the gender word itself in the country. But my experience to dealing with over the past years, they are very well organized, they are well funded, they are well coordinated, and as you rightly mentioned, in Iran, that every single sort of accounts there are person following. Like I mean, how many people they have engaged in terms of in terms of monitoring our activity. Just 2 weeks back, the last one I saw, they produced 35 minutes videos based on my activism. What approach we have followed, the way they have make the 35 minutes start. We followed the public health approach, HIV, and then slowly where we are today. Now we are approaching LGBTI and so on and so forth. So colleagues, what strategies collectively can be taken? I think one could be coming up some positive narratives, not to defend them, but rather, the narratives are coming from them every day, every week. From us, I think, they're using, sort of quote from Quran, religious books. But similarly, whether collectively someone can take initiative in terms of coming up some positive narratives about us so that it can, be posted in social media. More interestingly, whenever any post comes from that side, in 1 hour time, I don't know how it actually reaches 2 million and million views. That is another, sort of critical area. Views and comments and all those, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to. No, I couldn't agree more with you. There's a very, very well funded, well coordinated movement, anti gender movement, and it has actually, it's using our own language to turn the table around. So the word gender itself, the usage of the word itself is now in question. Transgender doesn't exist, sex doesn't exist, none of that exists. And more than that, also, like we are finding it's actually so well coordinated. I'm sure there are some people from the anti gender movement in this room also. Okay, they are in UN spaces, they are everywhere, they are everywhere. But but I do think that there's something to also learn from this well coordinated approach, which is that I think, like, on the other end, the way Arita sort of saying that, like, it's actually women are a great target from this movement. We know LGBT is a target, we know sex workers are target, but I don't think we are very well coordinated amongst us. We are all kind of operating in silos. And then there is there are activists, there are there are comics, there are media culture people. We are not connected together, we are not well coordinated, for sure, right? The second piece is like the language itself, the language that is sort of coming into question. There need to be ways of identifying how to reclaim that language back again, and that will actually really have to be like very contextual. Sorry to say, this movement is still very white, very global north. In the spaces these kind of conversations are happening, and we have to kind of turn that narrative around. The other piece, I think a very important piece that we are not talking about, that young people are talking about, is the digital space. And the digital space is definitely creating this narrative, and people like Elon Musk and other people like this, J.K. Rowling, they are very much, impacting the way we sort of think. And I think as activists, we did a lot on ground, but in the digital space, we are not challenging, the hate that is coming or the violence that is coming. In the digital space, if you try to do any kind of education around gender or sexuality or even use the word sex, right, it is immediately invisibilized. So I think the fastest way of spreading a message, it's also already prohibited, and we are not really sort of kind of fighting back against it. And I really think that the other problem that I find, and I'll just end with that, and I'm sure people want to say, is that if I look at the funding mechanism, right, if you look at them as a funding mechanism, the organizations that have funded them for the next 50, 60 years. We are actually essentially doing advocacy work mainly as community based organizations where we plan for the maximum of 5 years. Most of our funders are giving money for 2 years. Yeah. So just look at that. Maybe that approach itself has to sort of change. It can't be a 2 year program. We have to think a little long term. And that's just opening the discussion. Over to you, Rita.
So I think Sonal has covered majority part of it. I would answer you about you've mentioned that they're using Quranic ayat. So Pakistan is also an Islamic. Yes. So, but we exist. So what we have done is I've shared this ayat in Quran. There is the even Allah Taala has mentioned us in a way. So it says that we have created men and women and men and women together both. That means that men separately, women separately, and the third gender is trans people, the intersex people or gender minorities. We have used this ayat since 2000. It is still well. When they give us Quranic or Islamic, something like that, we just slap them back this and we're like, no, you cannot do it. In many hadith, if you'll go and look for it, the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned the trans people I'm talking. And using that umbrella, we used even in our law, we used the term gender minority. So we played it because we had to. Because, you're facing these things, we have faced worse than. Funding part is so true. Mehrab Awan, if you look her on Google, she has done her research and she has evidence that these people, these mullahs, they got 10 times more funding than the HIV projects we are having. And we are having the funding for a quarter. They had this funding for 6 years just to end this movement. And we were like, oh my God. So before, the law, it was like, if you start talking about LGBTQI community, you will go to the countries, you will have the visits, and you will, be the activist and you will have fun life. Now it's opposite. If you'll talk about the anti-gender movement and things like that, you're getting it. The recent example is Maria B. Maria B is a huge name in Pakistan. She's a designer. She had nothing to do with the gender movement, with trans people, with anyone. And she started doing stuff on internet that transgender people, they are men. They're men in a dress. The men in a dress. She used my pictures, my colleagues' pictures, and she was doing everything. In 1 year, her brand, she opened an outlet, 4 outlets in US, 2 outlets, new outlets in London, 2 outlets, new ones in Europe in 1 year. And her brand was not even doing that good. We were shocked. So use social media. Put everything over it. Whether it's going viral or not, use social media. Even if you're feeling not safe, put it on so that everyone will see what's actually happening. And they will start. Yes, that's what we are doing in Pakistan.
I want to be super short because very much conscious about the time. I think one thing that we tend to forget is our own mental and physical health as activists and falling into the rabbit hole of reaction to the opposition. And they're very well organized, as you say. So they come every day with something to make us busier to respond to them. So I think that's very important to be sure that you're in a good space, and it's okay if you take off for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, but you come back stronger. I think that's the most important. Also, my personal tip, I know that when I was born, life was not good, and when I die, believe tomorrow in 50 years, the world is not going to be an equal place for everybody. So we're just putting some little stones from here to there, and I think it just reduces a little bit of the impact they are going to have on us. Also, I recently read the book What It Takes to Heal, and my friend Mujan smiles because she's also reading it, and it's she's very active. She was or is very active in the Black Lives Matter movement, and she came up with a very beautiful vision and how us as activists have either personal traumas or have been witnessing other people's traumas. And this is how we started our activism, whatever trauma it is. And if the activism is coming from a place of pain, it is condemned to be ended very easily. But if it is coming from the vision that is leading us, we will win sooner or later. And this is something I check every day. So now I'm tweeting this, I'm answering this person. Is it my pain that is speaking, or is it my vision for an equal world that I'm speaking? And again, community is so important. Being in a safe space. Like this morning, I didn't feel safe at all. I was just like, yeah, I'm welcome here. Am I welcome here? Wait, where are we now? So I think that's very important to find the people, really, like your people, even if it's in like short check it. One of the last projects of Spectrum is actually mental health resilience building for activists and the LGBTQ community, and it works.
Just want to add something quick here. So in terms of how do you combat this, we have to look at the source and the origin. So we've been tracking this anti-gender movement from before it was the anti-gender movement. And before it was the anti-gender movement, it was actually the anti-COVID and anti-vax movement. And what we've seen is that a lot of these during COVID-19 and the lockdowns, there were a lot of these massive Telegram and WhatsApp groups that were formed against COVID and vaccine mandates. And these groups were well funded, and they were able to create very convincing content that COVID was, you have videos of someone like vibrating in his chair after getting a COVID vaccine, right? And people will believe that the vaccine has caused some kind of vibration. There were people attacking 5G radio antennas, thinking that these 5G antennas were spreading, something to people. So this is very convincing content. And what we saw, because some of us were monitoring some of these groups as COVID was sort of dying down, they started spreading, they wanted a new cause. Right? And this new cause became the anti-LGBT cause. And then a lot of funding trickled in, and they've been able to create very convincing content about against LGBT people, right? They are literally finding a butch, masculine man straight from the gym, putting a wig on him, and making him create a video saying he's a trans woman. This is exactly what they're doing. And they're disseminating this, and people are believing, oh, a trans woman is a butch man who decides to put a wig on himself, and now he's coming into the woman's bathroom to perv on women. No, but this is how the negativity of how they're creating this content is being done this way, right? So that it looks like this is a conspiracy to attack cis women by the LGBT community. That is, and children, right? Like children are being forced into gender affirming surgery. There is no country in the world where a child can be subject to a gender affirming surgery. You have to be an adult in order to go through their process. But in these same countries like the United States, a 16-year-old girl can have a breast enhancement surgery, as a cosmetic surgery or a nose job if they want to. No one is debating that, right? But they have created this whole thing that somehow, trans children, there are these trans kids who are being forced into these surgical interventions. So they're creating very convincing content, and we have to be, based on fear, and we have to be prepared for that. And what we're also seeing by monitoring incidents is that actually, when I said is cis women are the target, is because actually a lot of the backlash, even though it's supposed to be against LGBT persons, it's a cis women who are actually suffering a lot out of it. So we've had cases where, a cis woman who is not fitting this narrative of what a woman should be, like she could be, having short hair, or a woman who went through alopecia or is having cancer treatment and therefore has lost hair, a woman who is stockier, they are being physically assaulted and attacked because they're perceived to be trans, even though they're not, because social media is convincing people that the trans woman is this butch masculine man who is putting a wig and pretending to be a woman, right? So, this is where we're seeing the attacks happening, the targeting of cis women who are not fitting this narrative, and that's why I said women have, cis women have to be prepared, because that is the ultimate target, right? That is who they're coming from.
Talking about intersex children, it's a whole different,
I think I'm not the only one who doesn't agree with your vision that cis women are the biggest target here. I think population-wise, maybe they're the biggest target, but they're definitely the LGBT community is the target. Look at Iran. That if the LGBTQ community, an individual is living in Kurdistan, that Baluchistan, you don't even exist. And actually, cis women still do benefit from the laws. Still, I mean, yeah, they do benefit from the laws. They can be a cis woman. I cannot be myself. I cannot be me. I don't exist in the Iranian law, let alone the trans person. In Iran, you have to go through the surgeries, the whole, the top, everything. And it's not a surgery, it's the slaughtery. People go in the operation room, they come out of it like after 16 hours, not human anymore. So no, cis women still do have the privilege. And they
No,
will keep it.
I 100% agree with you. I am talking about this new anti-gender movement that is coming out of the West. So I'm speaking particularly on
yeah.
this new movement.
Okay. Yeah, we can have just one last question because I've already had a couple of signals from my other colleague.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, and thank you for this wonderful panel. And the first thing that I also did, like, where can I buy folks, which is that. And like the sad part is like, this like diversity and inclusion should be part of like every conversation, like how we talk about reproductive health, like should be a conversation of like LGBT issues. Similarly, like I want to sort of push the conversation bit. Like I want to invite you all to talk about a bit, especially when we talk about in the South Asian. I sort of disagree, like that the anti-gender movement is like especially came from the West. Like I believe, like like from a caste society, caste has particularly harmed disability rights and LGBT rights, and why I sort of like want to think about like caste and sexuality is because like as because we are assigned certain labor, like like transgender supposed to be in certain jobs, and like that reflects in our policies because just as how you mentioned, like similarly we also have a gender protect, and like the act sort of asserts a right about like that transgender people do like they have a right to work. So they created programs where like they would like capacitate, strengthen like their employability, but those employabilities are always imagined like vocational studies or like vocational training, or so it's not like never imagined like trans people can like they can be in like much higher positions, not like yeah, you got my point, right? Like or like or any policies like around like that sort of like controls like women's sexuality directly like like queer people. So what I think like like is like how this has turned anti-gender movement has really fanned what like caste harm that caste and religious fundamentalism has done to the queer rights.
Yeah. I think it brings so many thoughts, and I'm sure all of us want to sort of respond to it. Like, I've been deliberating about this whole thing as well, and 100% agree with you that, there are many fractures within the movements as well. But I think one thing to particularly note about the LGBTQI movement is that a majority of the movements could really become a full-fledged movement and not just a collective trying to do some advocacy was owing to the HIV movement. And unfortunately, when I look at this HIV movement, it's not necessarily well connected with the other movements in the country before that, whether it's a feminist movement or anti-caste movement or whatever. What I find is that, at least say from the context of India, previous to the HIV movement, when activists came together, they were very intersectional in their approach in challenging oppression. They were very intersectional about it. But I think like since the HIV movement has sort of come in, it has got separated, right? Now, in terms of the anti-gender movement and saying that it's always existed, like I am not going to agree with that, because the thing is, there's always been opposing parties, there have been opposing ideologies, there's been stigma and discrimination, but they were not as strong and well coordinated, and they are this strong and well coordinated because of Christian evangelical organizations coming and funding them with that kind of money, right, to come together and actually very what do you call it, very strategically, this strategies divide whatever you can. And so when I say, I can see it within the community. If I'll talk about caste, some of this stuff that the Hindu community community, LGBT community is saying is so deeply sort of problematic. And what is happening is now, instead of having I'm not saying we all have to be on the same page, but we were more or less similar on most issues. But now it's like you have to just pick and choose. You can, you talk to anybody, you are kind of afraid because you don't know fully what their stand will be on a particular thing. They may be similar to your ideology on a particular thing and then completely different. And sorry to say, even feminism has become a little bit like Puritarian. So it's like me and my 3 friends are feminists. The rest of the people are not true feminists, So some way we are not like also like holding space for polarity. So I think that's what's actually holding back. And the last thing I want to say is that all of this is really fueled by the politics of hate. And I find that our entire conversation is centered around the politics of hate, right? Even as activists, we are constantly raging, we are constantly angry, we are responding in rage. And, I feel so much resonance with Sode. Like, it's kind of killing us slowly inside, even if we genuinely believe it's a righteous cause. And I feel like that language has to shift to the politics of love. And that's, I know, crazy because the Christian movement kind of uses that itself to like propagate religion does. But can we reclaim that as a movement and change that language, take it, sort of back in our hand? That's the only way I think that we can sort these issues of polarity. And I think gender movement also, one last thing I want to say that, when there are polarities, usually you will see that one side of the polarity gets really heightened. But eventually with time, it has to come back balance. And I think we are at a space where it's not possible, like maybe not in the time we are alive, but it's not possible that this is not going to get challenged. It is going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope so. But I just wanted to mention, I think we cannot have this conversation without really saying the word colonization. All of us here have been colonized, either like physically, either our mental or our cultures. And I think one thing, at least, that Spectrum is facing, at some point, we started to translate articles instead of writing them. Of course, I write better than translating. This is my first language, right? It was like, okay, a white person has so maybe that's better. And I think that has a big impact individually and collectively. We still think we are not good enough, and everything that's happening in whatever laboratory in, you call them like Western, or I call them the minority world, it's better than us because we have had no culture, because we had no technology and so on. I really think we have to go inside ourselves. I do find myself sometimes looking at myself like smaller than others. I live in a white country, and every single day I'm standing out and like, well, in Iran we do that, and I do all sort of crazy stuff, and I say, yeah, we Iranians do that, forget about it, right? So I think that's very important, having colonization in mind. That is still ongoing. How is civil society in diaspora created? The Iranian case, it's about the donors. So donors say, how do you contribute to regime change? How do LGBT people participate in elections? I mean, we cannot have a queer person as a candidate in Iran. We cannot have somebody who doesn't wear hijab as a candidate in Iran. How do you want? So I won't have the money, I won't have the power, my work is not going to be sustainable, I'm going to be mentally tired, and fatigue is not. So it's a whole, our civil society, the Iranian civil society, is still being colonized. And this creates diversions, and this creates that we don't have one space to be able to speak to each other.
Adding to said, very conversation around this, because I would say my lived experience, especially when the first English speaking upper class gay men start organizing, they actually deliberately put people who would not know English out a lot. I would trans movements, especially in India. I can't say about other countries, but in India, this is so much of a reality when you talk about class, where you from. A lot of, I would say, mainstream trans movement also so much centered around and the religion also for that. And I'm just being so open about it because I'm just saying what is. I would surely agree to the fact that yes, fans. When you said it, does it fan? It does in ways beyond our and how it kind of manifest. Still, we are still kind of questioning a lot of. We don't know how it's still kind of in the process. I would say a person like me is still very deeply afraid and concerned because we don't want those divisions within already fragmented. Anyway, so sorry, could not kind of stop speaking about especially very last one. Sorry.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think privilege is a beautiful thing when you're transparent about it, when you are ethical about it, and when you use your privilege good and not to misuse your privilege to just seem, lack of better words, a white savior complex, but your brown privilege version of it. So I think that's really important. And you need to make that difference. And a small comment on digital transparency. When you do good, there's very little people supporting you. But the minute you make a human mistake, there's thousands and thousands of people to criticize that, conveniently editing out things to their agendas. And that happens on all ends.